Hi, everyone. I'm Don with Stout Tanks and Kettles. I'm here with Doug Beatty, who's our Technical Services Manager, starting a talk for the CBP Spring Virtual Conference here. We're going to talk about starting a brewery on a startup budget and some of the ways that you might be able to save and how they impact you in your business planning for your brewery. So I'm a former brewer of about 10 years. I've been with Stout now for about four, helping design breweries and helping to match people's business plans to the equipment that they need. So this has been a fun opportunity here to talk for CBP, and I'm going to let Doug give himself a quick intro here as well.
Hey, so I've been or was a brewer for 25 years, opened a lot of breweries over those years, including one for myself a few years back. So I have a pretty good perspective on this topic today for sure.
Excellent. All right. I'm going to pull up a quick PowerPoint here. We're going to go through it, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end here for any questions that you might have. Let me just see here 1 second. Bear with me. All right. And all right. So our topic today is opening a brewery on a startup budget. And I like this caption. You've dreamt about it for years. Let's help you make it happen. The biggest roadblock to opening your brewery is obviously the resources at hand and having the money to get it started. And now more than ever, folks are looking for ways to curtail the initial cost of opening their brewery, and some ways that you can save some money in the opening of your brewery that would be non-detrimental, so that you have to realize what you're going to have impacting your brewery as far as the pros and the cons of saving some money up front. But I think that's what we're going to kind of go over here real quick in this PowerPoint, starting with some of the initial areas where we would first start to save some money. And once again, the whole time we'll be talking about the pros and the cons, so that you can make some wise decisions for yourself. But typically in the 2 to 5 barrel range, people are starting up their breweries.
Don,
and yeah,
that PowerPoint's not showing.
PowerPoint's not showing. Okay, but you can hear me, but the PowerPoint's not showing.
Yep, I got a black screen.
All right. You are not showing. What about now? No. Okay. Well, technical problems here.
Tech help is here to save the day, hopefully. Don, what we're seeing, you're sharing your screen. We're seeing StreamYard right now. Just open up the PowerPoint window. That should solve the problem.
The PowerPoint window is open.
Then I'm going to remove it from the stream and reshare it and just share your entire screen. Let's try that again. Like I told you off camera, I appreciate you both being here today. Always appreciate the support you all give CPP. And like I said as well, love the shirts. Who doesn't like those awesome blue shirts? Good luck.
Everybody wants one.
And Don, it appears we are still seeing the same shared StreamYard tab. Are you able to potentially click your PowerPoint window?
Yeah, give me one moment. I'm going to see if I can get that up and running here inside like Chrome or something. If you could just take over for a few minutes there, Doug, and I'm going to work on that real quick.
Well, do you want to, maybe we'll start kind of going through some of the things that we were talking about without the visuals. Do you think that's all right?
Yeah. I mean, initially we're going to start by hitting our first area, which is going to be kind of platform, and how we can make some savings there.
Yeah. So we were talking, one of the things that we want to talk about is things that you can save on, things that are important, things that you can do without. Maybe you could skip and wait till later. Things that would be nice to have, but it's all about sticking to the budget, because when you're doing a startup, it's very easy to get way over the budget. You want to stick to your business plan, stick to your budget as best you can. One of those things on our list, I guess there's a lot of things, is the full stainless steel platform. Everybody sees those shiny platforms and says, that's what I want, especially if you're looking at stout tanks equipment, all very shiny, all, good showpiece kind of stuff. And really, the platform, it kind of depends. If you're in a brew pub and you're in a fishbowl, everybody can see everything. Certainly the shiny platform is a little bit more important than if everything's hidden out of sight, like a production brewery, or maybe just not that fishbowl kind of setting in a brew pub. The full stainless platform, it is nice, but it's much more expensive than the galvanized powder coated platform. A fraction of the.
Okay, so we're seeing this now.
Got it now? Yeah, there you go.
I believe so.
All right, good.
Okay,
good job.
Perfect. So, once again, I apologize for that, everyone. Just had to open it in a different way. But when we're looking at opening a brewery on a startup budget, that initial area can be constrictive and can keep you from meeting your dreams, and that's what we want to try and overcome, that obstacle. So a lot of people are utilizing their savings in order to make this happen. 401ks, angel investors. Some people are putting up their houses as collateral. So we don't want to mess it up. We want to make sure that you have a solid business plan and that you're taking into account the unique situation of your brewery, because every brewery is just a little bit different than the other. And let's see here if I can make that happen here. Okay. So working with the budget, will it impact my brewery? We're talking about long-term and short-term impact. So in many cases, if you spend less at the beginning, the long-term effect is obviously that you pay more. But sometimes it's just a matter of getting the initial concept going, proof of concept, and showing that it's going to work, and engaging the environment of your customers in order to really prove that it can get going. And then a lot of times it's easier to find the money afterwards. Like Doug had said, the stainless steel platform we're talking about is aesthetically pleasing. It's a great way to have your brewery look. A lot of people want to have a showcase, but this is a spot where I go to first, because a lot of times people in the 3.5 to 5 barrel range, they are not in need of a full platform like this. A lot of times there are some third party places that you can go on the internet and do a build your own platform, and they would probably save you about as far as cost, I would say they're probably about a fifth of the cost of a full beautiful stainless platform. So it does give you the ability to get that extra height to use your system, and if it does show signs of having any sort of like rusting, it's just a matter of redoing the powder coat on it. So
one thing that I would say about the platforms is I see people saying, particularly on a smaller system, like let's say a 3 or a 5 barrel system, they say, I want to save some money and I'm just going to rig something up that I can stand on to stir the mash. There's a safety factor involved there as well. So some sort of a platform is better than standing on something makeshift.
I've seen that as well, Doug. And sometimes you see people where they say, well, I'll just use a step ladder, and that just scares the heck out of me.
Yeah.
The fact is, if you go falling over into something that's boiling at 212, you're not going to be very happy, and you're probably going to get hurt. One of the things that's not explicitly said here in this slide is that the one side we have kind of a freestanding platform, and that's for individual vessels to be brought together and connected with hosing. And that is a large portion of the systems that we can get out much faster than the custom, say, hard piped, as you could see on that right hand side. I think that's from Nothing's Left Brewery. It looks like they had a nice hard pipe setup there. There is a cost difference. There is about a $10,000 to $12,000 difference between going with a freestanding system versus a hard pipe system. Now, the benefits of a hard pipe system is you have pre-established pathways, easy to train folks on, and also just not having a lot of hosing that you could potentially trip over, or you have to be coiling. So our next spot is the glycol chiller, and the groundwater temperature is going to have a huge impact on that. Those people who have breweries that are in the northern part of the United States, where your groundwater stays really nice and cold, are going to be able to benefit from that, because you don't need to have as much of a cooling system. You're not even going to be looking to run any sort of a glycol assist typically, unless you are an exclusive lager brewery. And I think this Pro Chiller setup over here was from Ridgeview Farms. Doug recently went out there and had a great time showing them, some of the brewing techniques there, because they were particularly mainly a winery. But getting out there and being able to engage is kind of a great thing. Doug, do you want to tell us about your experience over there?
Yeah, that's a great spot. You talk about a cool place to visit. I'm sure in the summertime when the grapes are growing and they're adding on to the winery, they're going to have some great events this summer. I'm going to try to get back there myself, actually.
That's great. Yeah, I think that when we're talking about that groundwater has a huge effect on the initial draw of BTUs, and if you're looking at say 60-degree water, your best ability to be able to knock out is going to be 68. There's typically about 8 degrees of separation there. And when we consider the glycol assist as part of the glycol chiller, it increases the size dramatically. So if you are fortunate enough to be in the northern United States, or somewhere where maybe you just have water that is not going to increase in temperature and is going to stay nice and cool, you don't need to have that glycol assist, and therefore you can have a smaller chiller, keep it on a much smaller budget. So some of the ways around that to achieve pitch temperatures, I like to call it the poor man's cold liquor tank. We utilize a brand new IBC tote. And in the case of what you see there on the slide, we do have stainless with dimple jacketing that you can utilize as kind of a CLT, but you do need to have a glycol system to run it. The other option would be the plastic IBC tote that is pallet jackable, that can be put into your cooler, say the day before. It's going to hold about 300 gallons or more, in which case you have 10 barrels of cold water that you can use for your knockouts. So typically you would hook up to that with your cart pump and go through your heat exchanger at whatever gallons per minute that you need to in order to establish your chilling. And then pros versus cons. I would say on the the cold liquor tank with the IBC tote, I think there's not really too many cons to it. I think you just have to have the space in your cooler, and when you're not using it the rest of the year, when it's nice and cold, you can store it easily because it has no weight if there's no water in it. I think the con would be if you're trying to do a lot of lager brewing, you probably want to have either that glycol assist or a full-on cold liquor tank setup where you can continue to do multiple batches. Is there anything I'm missing there, Doug?
Well, one thing I see a lot of people oversizing their glycol chillers, which can really add a lot to a startup cost. You have to kind of be realistic. If you only have so much space and you're not going to be adding a lot of tanks, you really want to think carefully about what size glycol chiller you want.
Yeah. And that can add up very quick, like you said. So
absolutely.
So the heat exchangers, the wort chiller, whatever you happen to be, the terminology you're using here, we're talking about, that is the initial BTU draw over a very short period of time. So matching it up properly, having those 8 degrees of separation. There's times where I talk to people and that is not an issue for them because they're maybe making a beer style where warmer knockouts are not a big deal. Maybe they're making some sours or whatnot. So it really comes down to the styles that you're doing. Another area that it does have an impact on, though, is the extra plumbing that's involved when you're running a glycol assist versus a just a standard single stage. So I think in the long term, just matching it to the types of beers that you're going to be doing, and I like to have a heat exchanger that's just a little bit bigger, so you have less clogging issues. So typically, I'll look into the larger frame size versus some of the smaller frame sizes that are out there. So.
One thing you can do too is even if you spend a little bit extra to get the 2-stage, you don't necessarily have to plumb that in to start. Like, let's say it's cold weather when you're starting up, maybe just you save a little bit of money and not spend that extra money on the glycol piping until later when you do need it and you have some money coming in.
Yeah, it's a great point. And another thing with sizing a chiller is a lot of times when you have a vendor that you're working with that can perhaps later on give you the secondary plates to do the glycol, as long as it's the same frame size, then that's also something you can always add on at a later date. All right. Now we're on to the mash tun design, and this is pretty common that no matter what size, everybody wants rakes and plow because they're just like, oh, I have to move grain. But sometimes the cost of rakes and plow can really affect your startup. And when you're talking about a few £100, I think it's more important to have a good grain out than necessarily have the rakes and plow. I've brewed on both 20 barrel and a 10 hectoliter system. On the 10 hectoliter system, we did not have rakes and plow, and it made just as great a beer as the other. It was all about just the grain out. I think a little bit of stirring and a little bit of exercise doesn't hurt any of us. But when we're talking about it, it all depends on the brewer too. If the brewer's starting off very young and in good shape, great. If you're a seasoned brewer and you've just been there and done that, and you truly insist on it, then it does cost some money in order to have that. But those two vessels, I would say the flat top design is just about half of the cost of a rakes and plow. So it can add to the costs very quickly. And then once you have that motor on top, then you need to have controls. And then, are those controls going to have to be UL listed? If you're an initial brewery and you're going to go through inspections, you're going to want the UL listing in order to get through inspections very easily. If you're an existing brewery that's been around for a long time, maybe you can get away with non-UL listed, but just knowing that if you were ever inspected, that you may have to upgrade at that point or have to pay for that particular aspect of it. I feel that the UL listing is important and ensures that your electronics are going to be built to a high standard, and you're not going to burn your building down or anything like that. So I think it's very important to consider that ability to sleep well at night is definitely a good thing. So
the rakes and plows are nice. They're definitely save you a lot of wear and tear on your body. But if you're in a 7 barrel or smaller, it's really not that hard stirring the mash. I mean, if you're older, obviously, like I said, it takes a toll on your body, but it adds a lot of expense. So it's something to really think about. How badly do you really need that?
Yeah. And then, on any of our hot side vessels, we talk about insulation versus non-insulation. So a mash tun, you typically want to hold its temperature pretty well a lot of people really want insulated, but if you're on a budget at the beginning, there's enough thermal mass there for, say, single infusion mash, where you're not going to be losing that much temperature over duration of time. A lot of times, your enzyme conversions for your grain are happening so fast. I mean, they can happen as quick as 20 minutes. 20 minutes of rest, 20 minutes of Vorlauf and go. Typically, in the past, I've seen that on a commercial level because the grains are just so well modified these days. But that considered, that could be $800 to $1,000 on each vessel for your hot side. So on the mash tun, a lot of times, if someone has a Herms coil on their hot liquor tank where they can recirculate and either bring up the temperature or hold the temperature, it's not as crucial to have the insulation on the mash tun, because then you could utilize Herms in order to maintain. The pros and cons of the rakes and plow versus flat top are pretty apparent. I mean, Doug just kind of chimed in there. Once again, I've brewed on both sizes, with and without. I think it's all personal preference and your budget. I don't think in the long term there's any huge loss, other than perhaps maybe down the road when you upgrade to another system. Yeah. And then we kind of have the same thing for the brew kettle and the hot liquor tank. You have these flat top versus dome top designs. The benefits of the flat top and the dome top, there's really not a huge difference. Some people say, oh, well, the dome top's going to give you your steam an easier egress. It's not the case. They're both going to work equally as well. There is a lot less cost in not having to make that dome shape. So that can bring down the cost of that vessel dramatically. Also, for the hot liquor tank, when we talk about the sizing of that, a lot of it is, especially on the electric systems, it's determined by the power and utilities of your building. So when you have a low amperage availability for an electric system, and the main reason I bring that up is for us at Stout, I would say electric probably makes up a good 80% of what we sell. It is kind of a clean and easy way to get going, and a lot of people are doing it because you don't have to do the HVAC work that's involved and any sort of specialized plumbing for like steam fitting. But when you have this low amperage option, we'll typically oversize the mash tun, or oversize the hot liquor tank, sorry, and put a timer on it so that you're ready to go for multiple batches first thing in the morning. If you do have good utilities, you can run a high amperage option, and you can run it concurrently at the same time as you're boiling in your kettle. Insulated versus non-insulated on these two vessels, I find to be much more of a sticking point because of safety. I like having insulated brew kettles and hot liquor tanks, because if you happen to bump into these vessels, and as they get larger, the chances are quite high that you will possibly bump into them. It gives you just a few seconds of safety, so that you're not getting scalded right off the bat. If you left your hand on it, you would still get scalded, but sometimes even that few seconds is worth a lot so that you don't get hurt. So I don't really see a ton of pros or cons here. I think that both of the vessels are going to be very capable. I do feel that insulation is important for these vessels for safety. But Doug, do you want to kind of chime in?
Yeah, absolutely on the insulation. As far as the dome top, again, this is kind of a showpiece kind of a thing. If your brewery is not on view to everyone, there's really no reason to go with that dome top. I mean, it does look nice for sure, but I guess you got to decide if it's worth that extra cost or not for you.
Yeah, excellent. This is kind of reiterating a lot of what we said as we've been going along here, that heat source options, your building is going to dictate this incredibly. I still feel the cleanest and easiest setup is electric. For the most part, you have an electrician do about an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of work. A lot of the remainder of it, you're able to run those cords yourself because you've dictated how long they need to be, and we've already pre-wired it. So quick and easy, no carbon monoxide to vent out. Direct fire comes in at a lower cost, but once you add in that HVAC work, they're about a wash as far as the cost of the system. The efficiency of the system, electric is definitely way more efficient. But depending on where you are in the US, your electric costs could be different than your gas costs. Those could always be in flux, and each person's geography is going to have a big impact on that as well. So indirect fire, great option. I love it. When I can't do an electric, I love indirect fire just because it's not affected by the negative air pressure that direct fire is. It's a much more efficient flame, but the vessels cost more to shape, and they have a lot more weight because they have a firebox with refractory brick in them. So those vessels do cost a lot more to make. And then steam, the vessels do not cost that much more to make, but adding a boiler to your costs, plus all the pipe work, you are looking at, adding good 40 to 50 grand to your system costs.
Easily.
So I tend to recommend steam for larger systems, 15 barrel and above. And the only time for smaller systems would be if somebody has existing infrastructure. I think that the pros and cons to that are really just dictated by the building and or your business plan. Electric, if you have an electric system and you steal all the power from your building and you have a kitchen and you need to run things, that's where you could kind of hamstring yourself. So it's taking in the whole picture of your business plan and thinking it through. And that's where a lot of discussions that I have with customers come into play, because we'll discuss that. We'll say not only just what system, but we're talking about how much beer do we need to make to fulfill the needs of your building or your business plan. So
yeah, the venting on the direct fire, like you said, your building plays a lot into that, and a lot of people don't think about it up front about the venting. Depends on where you're at. Maybe you don't have a lot of room to vent out.
mm-hmm. Or just the tiniest bit of space. And we sell a condensate stack where you have a S turn that allows you to catch any of that residual condensate as it comes down. But the one big thing is, if you're very short on space, you never want to go straight up from your brew kettle, because any of that ducting, that steam is going to condense and you're going to have rusty water coming back down into your brew kettle. So keeping in mind the space and the constraints is always an important thing. So many wild cards when we're talking about, putting together your brewery, and so many things to consider. So controls. So yeah, we work with Brewmation for our controls. We have basic controls, advanced controls. I say brewer's preference. There is a cost difference, obviously, between those, depending on the system type. Could be a few $1,000s. And it really depends on what type of brewer you are. I was always using, manual switches and gauges, and just keeping a very detailed log. Whereas the bonuses of having an advanced control system, which didn't exist when I was running my brewery, or if it did, it wasn't in my cost to have, is that it keeps track of a certain amount of things for you: temperature, trends, some recipe parameters, alarms. Having a visual interface is nice. I don't know. There's different schools of thought. I like knowing that I've manually either moved a valve or not. But at the same time, some of the remote capability and being able to check in on the brewery is nice. And I've had it where a lot of people on islands, for some reason, usually because maybe they're out in Hawaii, or maybe they're out in Bermuda, or or any of these islands where you have like one or two highways, but it takes you like 45 minutes to get to the other side or more. It's nice to be able to check in remotely on that, and a lot of people do that. VFDs versus non-VFDs. For a long time, variable frequency drives are expensive. They've come down significantly in cost, and almost everything that I quote has a variable speed drive on it, just because it's so much more precise, and it wears and tears the motor so much less. Your pump is going to last so much longer if you have a VSD on there versus just restricting it with a butterfly. I feel like that back pressure eventually just affects those seals. Now, granted, seals are something you're going to have to learn to change anyway at a certain point in time, but some people, as a cost saver at the very beginning, will say, no, I don't need variable speed drives. That is totally an option to go, and that is something that people did for years. I myself like to have that kind of precision on my pump and not beat up on my pump so bad. So
Yeah, I think the VFD is well worth it. One of those things I personally wouldn't skimp on. The control panels, that's an easy cost saver there. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with basic controls. If you want all the bells and whistles, be prepared to pay for it. But the VFD is, I think, that's a good investment to begin with.
yeah, and there are times where the controls make sense. The advanced controls, maybe you're not brewing and you want to keep tabs on how the brewing is going. That is an important thing. But yeah, that is a quick space, probably second to the platform that I would say as far as looking for cost savings. And then we have here, we're working with a sensitive budget. So considering some of your options, we here at Stout, we utilize some partners for lease to own programs. The nice part about a lease to own program is that the equipment is its own collateral. So you're not necessarily putting your house up for it. They can fund it quickly for qualified individuals, but it's not a SBA loan or anything like that. So it's a whole different type of funding. Some people love it, some people don't. But in the rule of things is sometimes you just need to get started and find a way to get it going. Beer is particularly lucrative, especially when we look at it as being able to withstand recessions, being able to be pandemic resistant. It is a great industry to be in because it's a simple pleasure that people do spend the money on, and finding the right way to do it. The other reason for a lease to own program versus traditional funding is maybe you have some capital that you want to save towards your build out. And if you're doing that, then spacing out the cost of your system over the course of, say, 5 years is not a bad idea in order to be able to make it happen. So next thing is just don't overspend. That's kind of part of my job, is to make sure that you're matched up with the right equipment. I would say a large portion of the time I'm talking to people, and they can come to me saying I need a 15 barrel system, and really they need a 7. It's just a matter of matching it to the business plan, and the business plan is key. It's the rules with which you are setting up your engagement with your business, and super important. No one can really get any money without a business plan these days. It's not like it used to be, where you could just decide I'm going to open a brewery and I'm just going to make it happen, and through sheer will. Not the case anymore. So working with someone you trust, and doing your homework. These are all things that as a brewery designer, a person that I talk to on the other end of the phone, I want to treat their resources and their business plan the same as I would my own. I want to give honest advice, and I want to make sure that we're not overspending, because I want them to succeed. Because in the long run, that is where someone comes back to you, is if you've done them well. the other thing about trust is the information you get. Maybe somebody might not intentionally be lying to you, but know where your advice is coming from. Is it dated? The typical rule that I've always heard from people is, oh, if I could have done it again, I would have just bought bigger. And yeah, maybe 5-10 years ago, obviously, yeah, definitely. Everybody's experiencing double-digit growth. Now there's 9,000 breweries out there and growing. And there's still plenty of room to be a part of it. It's just having reasonable expectations. Are you going to be a regional player? Most likely not, unless you have incredible funding and a killer business plan. Are you going to be a neighborhood location where people can go and drink beer in your four walls and make a good profit? I think that's the best model right now. I think some people will augment that with a little bit of packaging just to shield themselves in case of the pandemic or anything that happens in our economy as we're going along. Doug, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, one thing about the budgeting is it's going to cost more than you think it's going to cost, or more than you budget, and it's going to take longer to start up than you think it's going to take up. It's not a quick thing opening a brewery, no matter how quick you want it to be. So you want to take those things into account with your budgeting. It's going to cost more than you think it's going to cost. So be careful with that startup.
Yeah, and I would say construction times. When somebody gives you construction time, double it. Luckily, I think this past year with supply chain has brought a lot of people into the idea that you have to take it by the reins and move with it versus just hoping it's going to get better. In the past year, Stout added 2 more international companies we're working with as far as logistics, so that we can get our products moving back and forth in order to have those systems ready. So in the past 6 weeks, over 21 containers in our warehouse. So we are kind of at the height of having our stock ready, and just trying to plan accordingly to keep those lead times down, because everybody has a different business plan. Some people can wait. Most people are shooting for summer. And that's always the thing. And as summer gets closer, it gets harder and harder to nail that one down. But we do our best to get you what you can as quick as we can, and doing with some good advice along the way. So let's see. Our last slide here is just checking in on questions that people might have. We have these stackable tanks here. This is a stackable mash tun on top of a hot liquor tank. This is Heckler Brewing, I believe. And it's nice to be able to maximize your footprint. That's another area where we didn't really talk about it as a direct savings. It's much more of an indirect savings. But when you consider every square foot of your building is a cost to you, maximizing on your footprint is huge as well. So I'm going to close this out and get back with Doug here on the screen. We can talk about some questions that folks might have, maybe some experiences that both Doug and I have seen where, without naming any particular places, but maybe things that we've seen that have worked and that haven't worked. Obviously utilizing a step ladder as your platform is a bad idea, so don't do that.
Yeah, you got to take into account safety things. In the early days, a long time ago, when Don and I were young brewers, people were looking at cramming a brewery in the smallest space possible, and just not safe conditions. I think people are being a little bit more considerate of the brewer, so situations like that have gotten a little bit better. But you always want to take into account safety factors as far as your spacing goes.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of par for the course for brew pubs for years. The customer facing area is what makes the money. So they were going with this model of, say, 1 square foot per barrel of production. So if you were a 5 barrel and you were making 500 barrels a year, that you had to fit within 500 square feet, which is just a bit tight.
Right.
I think, when you want to consider the fact that a workers' comp lawsuit could cost you, um, some space is always important. That's why matching the system size to the space is important. You
Yep.
want it to be tight enough to be profitable, but you don't want it to be so tight that your brewers are getting injured on a regular basis because they can't move around. Um, so that's definitely important. So
I think with space constraints too, you want to think about, if you want to think long term, you want to think about things that you can change out later. You know that if you're building around your brewery, what's going to be harder to take out later? You know, you can upsize certain small things, but you know, a whole brew house, maybe you don't have the room to completely, you know, bring in a double the size kettle or mash tun. Um, what's going to be easy to change out later on? That's something to think about
yeah.
if you upsize.
Well, yeah, in urban areas, people working with very little space. One thing that I would say is my advice to anybody who's doing that. Like there was one brewery that I know of that had to tear open the floor to lower their equipment into the basement, and then build the floor back up over it because it was a basement brewery. But then in asking, have you looked at any of your equipment? They're like, no, it's still sitting in crates. And I'm like, all right, that's a big bit of faith. We have to
Not
we have to be
easy to change
cautious
that
of
out
that.
later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and it's not just one brewery. You would wonder because these projects take so much time, and your initial thought is I'm going to just keep it in a crate just to keep it safe, and that's great, fine and dandy. But that floor going up is a permanent, and it definitely has an impact. So
Yeah.
always keeping that in mind is key as well, because that could save you a lot of money, not having to re-rip up in the floor to change something out. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that the brew platform being the first spot to look, um, and then your controls, and then and getting into the uh, maximizing your geographic location. So if you have cold water, you're going to benefit. It's kind of unfortunate that the people that need a cold liquor tank have the such hot temperatures that they're already fighting to begin with. So it's a pain that's felt for anybody that's living down in southern United States or even Mexico or whatnot, where you're going to have to spend the extra money on those systems. So
Yeah, if you're in a northern state, it's pretty unlikely that you, depending on your situation, that you really need a cold liquor tank, especially if you're
mhm.
a brew pub versus a packaging brewery. Um, and another thing to think about with the savings is that I think a lot of people, it's underappreciated, is the heating method. Uh, yeah, steam's great, but a lot of people don't realize all the expenses that go into a steam system. It's not just that boiler, but getting that piping done is not cheap.
Oh yeah, yeah. That steam fitting can cost as much or more than the boiler itself.
Hmm.
And that's more and more common with the wages that are involved, and the distances that are involved in your building. Your building can totally have that impact. Um, so when we're talking about um, some of the other things would be that I didn't bring up. Sometimes people are like, well, turnkey. I don't want turnkey. I'm going to save so much money. The chances are that if you are saying you want to get rid of turnkey, that you're probably going to need it, because the majority of folks that I'm dealing with are startups, and that turnkey presence, as much as you say, oh, I don't want to pay for that, that support is really going to help you get going, and it's going to keep you moving along. And it's very important to have that because time is money. Um, if you're thinking about how to plumb this thing through and you're trying to get all the parts together to do that, great. As long as you have it figured out well in advance and you're an experienced brewer. But anyone else, I would say 99% of what I sell is turnkey as far as, especially when we're talking about controls situations, because everybody says, well, I can save a lot of money there. Maybe you could save some money, but you're going to save yourself some headaches and save yourself time. Time is really key, and time is money. So,
Another thing that we didn't talk about that's a good savings potential upfront is malt mills. Um, you can, if you're really on a tight budget, you can buy pre-milled malt and do without that mill to start, because
yep.
not only do you have the cost of that malt mill, but what if you need a separate room for it, depending on your zoning, your auger? There's a lot of expenses that can go along with that.
Yeah, and that's one that I kind of kick myself. That should have been on our slide, because the fact is that you're totally right. These days, pre-milled malt, when we are talking to people who buy from maltsters are going to have those, 4 or 6 roller mills. They're
Yeah.
going to have the much nicer mill than most people will have. You're going to pay more per pound for your grain, and you'll probably have to order your base malt by the pallet load. So, 40 bags at a time or something like that. Unless you have a good relationship, maybe they'll do a half pallet or something for special customers or someone local to them. But typically, yeah, it's a great way. And I see it more and more, to keep the mill out of these brew pubs where you just don't have the space.
Yeah, a
And
lot of,
even if
lot
you
of
did
dust
have
in
the
the
space,
restaurant
the
area.
dust,
Yeah,
yeah, the dust that can get into into the air and make its way into a tank, that naturally occurring lactobacillus on there, that could really funk up your beer. You
yeah,
don't want that. You don't want to have all of a sudden sour flavored beers and things like that, unless you're controlling it. Um, but yeah, the fire marshals are, depending on your location, can really put you through the ringer on a
yeah,
mill. So when you talk about a mill and you put it on your floor plan, do not call it a mill. Call it a grain cracker or a grain crusher. Anything but a mill, because the second you say that, the hairs on the back of the neck of
yeah,
your inspector go up, and they all of a sudden are in a tizzy, because they're thinking of flour mills, bakeries. That fine particle becomes so much more combustible. Um, that said, if you do have a mill room, it's good to clean on a regular basis. It only takes a 32nd of an inch to be combustible.
yeah,
So the important part is utilizing explosion-proof motors, which we do on ours. We do offer them without that, but I that's kind of like insulation versus non-insulation. If I'm talking from a safety component, those couple extra $100 are probably well worth it. So,
yep.
um, yeah. All right. Um, I think everybody's circumstance is going to be unique, and that's why it's important to have these talks. We're going to cover the bulk of it in these, but there's always going to be a given, something that we haven't come across yet before, because your unique situation. So, if that happens to be the case, getting on the horn, talking to us about your business plan and the equipment you're looking for, giving us the opportunity to quote you. In the end, you're going to decide who you're going to go with and how you're going to go with it. But give us a chance. I think if you get to work with us, you'll realize that we have your best interests in mind, and we can talk through some of those facets of the business plan with you and get you pointed in the right direction. So,
Yep. And if you do
um,
have questions after this is done and
mhm,
we're not live anymore, reach out to us at any time.
yeah, excellent.
Happy to help. Happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just want to say thanks to CBP for having us. Always a wonderful experience to be able to get out in front of all your folk and talk about the things we're seeing in the industry and the things that need addressing in the industry, and hope to continue to do it many times more. Um, Thanks to Andrew and everyone else there.
Yeah, thanks,
And
Andrew. CBP.
yeah, and we're going to get on going with our day here. But please feel free to give us a ring. And I hope you have wonderful and safe brews ahead of you. Take care.